What's up, everybody? D-Man back. Welcome to a brand new video, and today we're going to be doing another Godzilla figure review. This one for Godzilla -1 from Bandai. This is the Bandai Movie Monster Series Godzilla -1, aka the 6-inch Godzilla -1. I've been so excited to get this guy, so let's freaking talk about him. This is, of course, director Takashi Yamazaki's third iteration of Godzilla, his first being in Always, which was very GMK inspired, his second being Godzilla The Ride, which goes a little more Heisei, and then his third being Godzilla -1, which is an evolution of that design from Godzilla The Ride. And with the Bandais, they come with these tags. I actually think it's a really slick tag. I really love this render of Godzilla. The back of it's pretty cool because it's the dorsal spines, but it's shaped like them, which is cool. Got a little bit of information on the inside of the box with this cool Godzilla silhouette. Guess it's not a box, it's a tag. And like the other video, I'm gonna leave the tag on because it's kind of Bandai tradition to leave the tags on. That's what people want you to do. And just like I said with the Godzilla The Ride, I want to reiterate how special these Bandai figures are. They're a soft vinyl plastic, and I really like it. They're very squishy. You can pinch them, you can squeeze them, you're not gonna break them. They're very durable figures, and they were great when I was a kid because you could do a lot with them. For instance, there's not a ton of articulation with these guys, but if I wanted Godzilla to punch somebody, I could still bend his arm and make him do a big punch. If I wanted him to tail strike, I could still swing him and make the tail swing and strike. It was something that I loved to do as a kid, and personally, in my opinion, of all of the Godzilla figures I owned, the Bandai ones were always the most special and always the most fun to play with. Of course, there weren't options like NECA and stuff that were making Godzilla products when I was young, so I didn't get to get all of the ones that we have now with all the bells and whistles, but I do want to just shout out the durability and the niceness of these Bandais. They're very nice and they're very durable. I used to chuck mine off ledges or buildings and they'd be fine. Also, if you get these guys in Japan, they're very cheap, whereas in the United States it's like 45 bucks to get this guy, which is silly. Starting out, I want to give a lot of credit where credit's due because they have absolutely killed it with the sculpt for this guy. I mean, this thing has some incredibly accurate details. I think the face looks wonderfully accurate to the -1 face. They have added the cheek scar. It's not totally noticeable on this figure, but they did add it. You can more notice it in the paint rather than the sculpt, but it is there. As far as Godzilla himself, they've got a lot of great details. I think the face is very well realized. I think it looks really good. I like the eyebrow, I like the eyes, I like the crown of spines on the head, the cheeks, it all works really well. The mouth looks really nice. They've done a lot of detailing on the inside of the mouth with the tongue, and then the back of the mouth has this slit where the atomic breath comes out. They've got a lot of really good stuff on this figure. The front of the body is super accurate to -1. I think they've done a really great job adding the depth of the neck in the -1 movie. They've also got these very two specific lumps on Godzilla's chest, and the whole thing just looks fantastic, even down to the way that his scales kind of rumple towards the bottom of his belly. Also getting into the leg patterns where you've got all these different scale patterns meshing into each other. Some of it's bumpy skin, some of it's harsh scaling, going along with the idea that Godzilla is this abomination. The feet look wonderful with these incredibly well detailed toes. I think they've done a really good job with it. One thing that I think they could have done a better job on is the hands. They're just a little small. I think one thing that would have helped is rather than having the fingers all kind of cupped together, if they had just spread them out a little so that the hand had an open palmed grip. I think that would have helped because currently they've just kind of grouped them all into one and it just doesn't look as good as I think it could. I also think they could have made the elbow spikes a little larger, as -1's elbow spikes are just a little larger. But overall, it's pretty clear to me that they have basically just taken the CG model and then adapted it into a Bandai, and I think they've been very successful with it for the most part. He's similarly bulky to -1, but he doesn't feel overly wide or fat, kind of the way that Godzilla The Ride that I talked about did. I think it's just a really successful figure overall. As far as the paint job goes, they've clearly gone with a bit more of a gray tone rather than the brown that -1 sometimes looks like in the movie, but also could just be because of the color grading, because the official release of the -1 render that we have is a little more blue, and you can see that there's a bit more of a bluish gray tone to him with these more brown highlights on him, and I think the figure mostly does a good job of capturing that. Areas where I think it could be taken further are on the feet and the hands. I would have taken it a little further further there, as well as in the central area on the chest. I would have added a lot more brown in the central area on the chest. But in addition to the very rich sculpt, which has these great skin patterns all over it, it's got a paint job that really complements that sculpt, because you have this kind of dull gray look to the whole Godzilla. That's kind of this dull gray plastic that is the base for him. And then there's a lot of highlights added to him with these browner areas that look really nice. The spines don't really have any sort of paint going on, and that's mostly alright, because in the -1 movie, his spines are just the same color as his body. But I would have taken the spines a bit further as well, because I do think on the figure, they're not as well detailed as they could have been. Like, there's not as much texturing in all of the areas as I would have liked. I would have liked the spines to be a bit more in-depth, but I do think they're generally pretty successful in terms of the shape and the size. I just think with spines this large, you could have textured them a lot more, although I do like that they gave the spines the depth that they have, where Godzilla -1 has these thick spines. They're thicker than normal with these kind of multi-tiered layers to them, and the spines on this figure capture that very well. I also really like the way they've done the spines on the tail, because it looks just like the movie. So that's another thing I think they've been pretty successful with. As far as articulation goes, you don't have articulation in the tail. The tail band where the two pieces of the tail are put together is a little more subtle on this one than it was on Godzilla The Ride, for instance, but you can still see that it's been put together here, and it is still noticeable. Same with the one on the tail, linking the tail to the body right here, still a little noticeable. In either case, neither have articulation, which I think would have been an easy place to add articulation, and especially in the neck. I think with -1 having a much slimmer neck, it just made way more sense to put articulation on the neck, and they didn't, so that's kind of a missed opportunity. As far as articulation goes, you've got 1, 2 for the legs, and then 3, 4 for the arms, so a total of 4 points of articulation, which is pretty standard for a Bandai Godzilla. That wasn't the only Godzilla -1 Bandai I got. I also got this one. This is the Bandai Movie Monster Series Godzilla -1 theater exclusive version, which, as the name implies, was sold exclusively in theaters on the release date for Godzilla -1, and they sold really fast. I mean, these were hot ticket items. One thing I did want to shout out that I forgot to mention was how nice I thought the eyes and the mouth were. I think the eyes on this guy are really well done, and I think the mouth is really well done as well. Teeth look great, the actual flesh color on the mouth looks great, the eyes again look great. This guy's totally different. He is this translucent blue with these sparkles, and I love it. I think it looks fantastic. He's got this kind of galaxy glowing sparkly silver skin. It's all blue, but then it's got these silver sparkles and glitter in it. I think it's so beautiful. I really like it. I think this was a great choice. He's also a bit more firm than the original release. This is a bit harder of a plastic, so while it is still this pretty vinyl, which I always just love the in-hand feel of, it is a bit more firm than the original release, which is nice. You've also got a different thing here with a different render of Godzilla. It's all purple now. The back is also that spines, but they're all purple now. It's a different silhouette on the inside, I think, as well. The only item that I have that is semi-similar is this 2001 King Ghidorah. I believe this is the Godzilla Store exclusive Bandai King Ghidorah. There's the two of them together, and I personally like the -1 a lot more. I think they picked a much brighter and flashier color, catches the eye a lot better. I also really like the sparkles on this one that aren't present on this one. I don't know if that's because theater exclusives have sparkles, well, like for instance Godzilla Store exclusives don't. I'm not a big enough Bandai collector to know. I just think the -1 is a lot prettier. So I wanted to show the two of them off together, as I did want to show these guys off together as well. I wanted to show those guys off, so we got that all covered. As far as the figure comparisons go, I wanted to bring out this guy in particular. This is the Bandai Godzilla The Ride Godzilla, which I just unboxed and reviewed on the channel. He is so much bulkier than the -1 Godzilla. He's also a lot greener, and overall I just think that the -1 figure as well as the -1 sculpt is a massive improvement on Godzilla The Ride, even though they're the same base points. Godzilla The Ride has these enormously comically goofy feet. He's got this wide-legged stance. His arms are way out to the side. They just look strange. His hands are comically large. His neck and chest are really wide. He's got this really bulky look to him overall, and -1 kind of goes for a more wider-thighed, slimmer chest, which I think works really well. The side profiles on these guys is fairly similar, but again, I think -1 just steps things up in a big way. Overall, I would say the figure made a vast improvement, and so did the real design. The figure feels a little more accurate to the movie, and also the issues with the -1 figure are less egregious than the issues with the other figure, which are pretty much the same issues for both, like the hands, like the placement of those lines where you can see the plastic on plastic. I just think the -1 was a bit more successful overall. Another one I wanted to get out was the Bandai Movie Monster Series Godzilla 2019, because this is the only Bandai Movie Monster Series Legendary Godzilla I have, and so I wanted to show off the most recent American Godzilla against the most recent Japanese live-action Godzilla, and the two of them standing next to each other are pretty neat. I think the -1 is a lot better than the Bandai Movie Monster Series Godzilla 2019. I think it's got a much better sculpt with a lot more detailing into it. I think the skin texture is a lot more advanced, although I do like the blue paint on the dorsal spines as well. I could get that that as probably a second Bandai figure. Like, they're for sure gonna sell a second -1, but this time with blue spines. Like, that's just what they do. Finally, I'll show him off again against the NECA Godzilla 1989, just because that's kind of Toho's standard-based Godzilla, and it's also the one that inspired the -1 design. The -1 design feels like an evolution of that Heisei design, and I think that these two figures side by side, you can really tell because they look like they're kind of the same figure, because they look like they're based on the same Godzilla potentially. Like, if from far enough away you didn't know about -1 and you saw these, you might just assume they're two adaptations of the same Godzilla until you turn them on their sides and see those spines. And so I wanted to show them off because I think it really highlights what I loved so much about the -1 design, and that's that it took this Godzilla design from the 1980s and 90s and it just kind of evolved it. The biggest place it did that was with the spines. So I wanted to show those guys off. Obviously they're going for two very different price points, two different terms of qualities of figures, but I do think they do look pretty solid next to each other, and I think -1 stacks up pretty alright, all things considered regardless. Overall, my final thoughts on this Godzilla -1 is that he's painted very well. I like the paint job quite a bit. I like the sculpt a lot. I think the articulation is pretty standard for Bandai, so I'm not going to harp on how I think it could be better because, well, I do think there's more opportunity for room to grow, like in the neck. Overall, it's pretty standard for Bandai. So I think it's a solid figure all the way around, and I'd give it like an 8.5 out of 10. As far as a Bandai goes, I'd give this one like an 8.5 out of 10. Great sculpt, very well realized, very accurate to the movie. It just has some areas that I think could have been just slightly better. That'll do it for this one, guys. I want to give a huge thank you to my patrons over on Patreon. If you want to support the Patreon, you can using the link in the description below, where you can get early access to content, access to the Discord community, and more. That'll do it for this one, guys. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I will see you guys next time for the next one. D-Man, out.